Wolfovich's paranoia. The Belarusian regime complained to Putin about mythical hundreds of drones that are allegedly attacking Belarus. Subtle trolling from Zelenskyy. Lukashenko wanted a meeting between the presidents of Ukraine and Belarus, but it was Tsikhanouskaya who came to Kiev. Russian logistics in the occupied Ukrainian territory are turning into hell. Military equipment is already burning 100 kilometers from the front line. And that's not the limit. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine confirmed the shutdown of the Syzran refinery in Russia, and in Russian cities, the wait half a day for gas flash mob is spreading again. We'll tell you about this and more right now, and don't forget to like this episode, and let's get started. The Lukashenko regime continues to actively carry out Putin's tasks to drag Belarus into the war with Ukraine. It does so, as usual, stupidly and falsely, but diligently. Yesterday, the Secretary of the Security Council of Belarus, Alexander Wolfovich, in Moscow, spoke about alleged daily attempts by Ukrainian drones to cross the border. Moreover, Wolfovich claims that in the last week alone, 116 such cases were recorded. In response to the story about mythical hundreds of drones, the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine noted that this is another attempt by Belarus to blame Ukraine for something and shift responsibility onto it. Let me remind you, it is the aggressor state Russia that uses Belarus for the flight of its strike drones into Ukraine. There are also certain repeaters on the territory of Belarus that help the enemy control their drones. President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelenskyy spoke about the results of the meeting with Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya and her team, who arrived in Kiev. According to him, during the negotiations, they discussed the situation in Belarus and the risks of increasing Russian influence on the country. Zelenskyy noted that Russia is trying to drag Belarus even further into the war against Ukraine. However, the Ukrainian side supports the desire of the Belarusian people for independence and the reduction of external interference. He also emphasized that Ukraine has never posed a threat to Belarus, and future relations between the states should be based on the real independence of both countries from Moscow. The president also expressed gratitude to the Belarusians who support Ukraine in the conditions of war. Meanwhile, Volyn and the Kiev region are preparing an all-around defense against an invasion from Belarus, the threat of which is literally in the air. About how Ukraine and its allies are preparing for new threats from Putin's henchmen further in the report of our journalists.
Ukraine is preparing for another offensive.
We have the opportunity for reinforcement. We have the opportunity to work preventively on Russian territories. There could be a threat from there regarding the actual leadership of Belarus, which should stay on its toes. That is to feel that there will be real consequences if there are aggressive actions against Ukraine, against our people.
To which the head of Belarus offered Volodymyr Zelenskyy a personal meeting in any place in Ukraine or in Belarus, supposedly to settle relations. And he assured that Minsk supposedly has no intention of getting dragged into the war.
If we are to be drawn into a war, including if it is against Ukraine, it will be in only one case. If they commit an act of aggression against us, we do not intend to get involved in the war in Ukraine. And there is absolutely no need for that. Volodymyr Zelenskyy needs to calm down and come to his senses.
A painfully familiar narrative. But Ukrainian intelligence and defense forces see the situation quite differently. After months of Russian troop activity near the northern borders, road construction in Belarus toward Ukraine, and the setup of artillery positions, the threat of a strike from the north is no longer hypothetical.
But Russia is certainly considering various escalation options for using other corridors, other territories, other bridgeheads. Belarus is one of those bridgeheads.
That is why northern Ukraine is effectively being put into a state of reinforced defense. The SBU, together with defense forces, have launched large-scale counterintelligence and anti-terrorist measures in 5 regions at once: Kyiv, Chernihiv, Zhytomyr, Rivne and Volyn. In the border areas, evacuation plans for the population have already been prepared, safe zones identified, and local communities, along with the military, are practicing actions in case of a new invasion.
No one is going to open a second front. The Russians lack forces and resources on the main front, the southeastern and Zaporizhia ones. They lack equipment, ammunition, and personnel. To deploy a strike force, it would need to be 150 to 200,000 strong. Where will they get them?
But most importantly, does the old man have enough strength?
Life really doesn't ever let us just relax.
After all, in the event of direct entry into the war, Belarus will become not just an accomplice, but a legitimate target.
Well, let's look at it from a military perspective. What is Belarus? It's the balcony of Europe. From the north, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia. Well, obviously there's no border with Estonia, but there is with Lithuania and Latvia, though Estonia still looms over it, so to speak. From the west, Poland. From the south, Ukraine. That means nearly 3,000 kilometers of border with, to put it mildly, unfriendly states. Only Russia is at the rear, but right now Russia's hands are tied. There's absolutely no possibility of support because Russian troops are tied up in combat in the Ukrainian theater of operations. Lukashenko is just plain scared.
And the mustachioed one knows full well that such a step would not be a show of strength for him, but the beginning of the end.
The Belarusian army he can operate with, well, the quantity and quality of the Belarusian army, it can only be used at this point to defend Minsk alone.
And that's it. It won't hold the defense of Belarus anywhere if, God forbid, something happens meaningful for Lukashenko from his point of view. He understands this perfectly well. He's obviously a collective farmer through and through, meaning he's still just a farm chairman. He left the farm, but the farm never left him. But the thing is, he can feel it in his gut, or rather, with the gravity of his years, he knows perfectly well that his position is very precarious.
Amid the escalating situation, Belarusian opposition leader Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya has arrived in Kyiv for the first time. Russia is deliberately trying to break people with fear, darkness, and constant nighttime shelling. But every such strike only further reveals the true nature of the Putin regime. A regime that recognizes neither human life, nor international law, nor borders. Alexander Lukashenko's regime is responsible for Russia's aggression against Ukraine as it allowed Belarusian territory to be used for launching missiles and housing Russian weapons. During the visit, meetings were held with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha, the leadership of the Verkhovna Rada, and EU diplomats, as well as the opening of the mission of the Democratic Forces of Belarus in Ukraine.
They're making it clear, we'll kill you and make Tsikhanouskaya the president. How's that? A good signal? It's a perfectly normal signal. They're sending him a message. Whether it happens or not, we'll see. Time will tell. But now we already have a partner. And if you go any further, keep in mind this partner will become the president of Belarus. No one's going to play nice. Well, again, you see, Lukashenko is in a difficult position. Who said the Belarusian army, the Belarusian people, the population of 9 million is going to fight Ukraine? Why would he want that?
And that is perhaps the main paradox of the situation. Lukashenko is desperately trying to sit on two chairs at once. On one hand, constant talks with the Kremlin, Russian troops, joint exercises, and turning Belarus into a military bridgehead for Moscow. On the other, cautious signals to Europe and an attempt to convince the West that Minsk supposedly doesn't want direct involvement in the war.
French President Emmanuel Macron called the Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko more than 4 years after their last conversation, which took place in February 2022.
French sources close to the Élysée Palace emphasized that the French president in particular highlighted the risks for Belarus associated with a possible involvement in Russia's war against Ukraine. He also urged Lukashenko to take the necessary steps to improve relations between Belarus and Europe.
The president of the French capital is following the path of his American colleague who, as is known, established his own channel for regular contact with the Belarusian leader. All this could be linked to such political considerations had Emmanuel Macron not made his call to Alexander Lukashenko on Sunday, which is also a demonstration of the urgency of contact between the French and Belarusian leaders. Even if Moscow orders an attack to be carried out under the pretext of some provocation, one they've invented themselves, nothing will save Lukashenko. At that point, he'll simply be gone. It's the end for Lukashenko. And
the main question now is whether the Russian dictator can finally push Lukashenko over the edge.
Yes, they are raising the stakes. Yes, he's escalating the situation himself. Lukashenko's latest statement about not wanting war, being ready to meet Zelensky, means that one must prepare for war. It seems to me that this is a demonstration for Moscow that he's preparing, that he's showing them and so on. But he's doing this to avoid his own involvement and ultimately to keep Belarus out of the war, whether with Ukraine or Lithuania. He's trying to protect himself from Moscow in some way by doing this. In other words, I'm technically complying, but I have no intention of attacking. I'm sure Macron made a routine statement that he wouldn't attack, though it's possible Macron warned him about the consequences for him. Ukraine has already warned him. Any attempt at an attack, and he's the main target. He'll be killed.
But even more importantly, will Grigorievich himself risk openly entering the war alongside the Russian Federation?
President Volodymyr Zelenskyy commented on Alexander Lukashenko's words about his readiness to meet with the Ukrainian president, pointing out the fact that Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, the leader of the Belarusian opposition in exile, has already arrived in Ukraine. For the first time in this format of ours, there are representatives of Belarus. Lukashenko recently said that it's time for the presidents of Ukraine and Belarus to meet. And it turned out, interestingly, Lukashenko spoke, but Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya arrived, Zelenskyy noted. Speaking at the 4th International Summit of Cities and Regions, the president emphasized that most of those present clearly understand and feel what the expression "for our and your freedom" means. This is exactly how we are defending ourselves in Ukraine right now. This is exactly how the freedom and independence of many others in our Europe was protected. This is how the entire free world lives. Thanks to the readiness of others to come to the aid and defense of the one who is facing unjust strikes and wars of aggression, he noted. The Russian Foreign Ministry's warning to foreign diplomats about the shelling of Kiev did not have the effect Moscow expected. No one rushed to pack their bags and tearfully book tickets to Warsaw. And in Moscow, they're already backtracking, saying that Russia won't strike the office of the President of Ukraine or the Verkhovna Rada as part of the announced strikes on decision-making centers. This was stated by the chairman of the State Duma Defense Committee, Andrei Kartapolov. But it's understandable. After the Oreshniks' powerful strike on a garage cooperative in a provincial Ukrainian city, their targeting is clearly off. We'll tell you more about this disgrace of the Russian missile forces. Next.
The Kremlin's failure. Russia launched an intermediate-range ballistic missile, the Oreshnik, to strike Ukraine.
Putin launched his Oreshnik against Bila Tserkva. They're truly unhinged. It's important that this doesn't go without consequences for Russia.
The Oreshnik was launched from the Kap range, Kapustin Yar, Astrakhan region, Russian Federation, but it landed in the Kyiv region. This information was confirmed by the head of the communications department of the Ukrainian Air Force Command, Yuri Ikhnat. The footage published online captured the moment of impact with the separation of warheads, accompanied by a series of explosions.
Oreshnik actually hit a garage cooperative in Bila Tserkva, and in a completely different part of the city from the airfield. That's quite a retaliatory strike.
The remains of the missile were collected and sent for examination. The Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation confirmed the use of the Oreshnik missile. They added that the strike's objectives were achieved. All designated targets were hit.
Did you like the picture? Beautiful. There aren't even any explosions. Just very expensive metal into the ground, for the sake of a pretty picture that no one except pensioners believes in anymore.
Their indignation is quite understandable since the cost of one such missile.
To destroy with a missile that costs $50 to $80 million, to destroy 3 garages, well, it looks kind of unserious.
This amount is equal to hundreds of annual budgets of Kapustin Yar from where the Oreshniks are launched. Well, Kapustin Yar itself continues to fall into decay. There are 3 versions of where the Russians wanted to hit this time. The first one is absurd, but it exists.
There was a workshop for the production of FPV-1 drones which fly over Russia and cause the Russians a lot of trouble.
Some propagandists claim that there was an airfield nearby or a non-functioning thermal power plant.
But even let's assume that there was a military airfield in Bila Tserkva which hasn't worked for a long time, where nothing has flown for a long time. Well, let's say they wanted to destroy some buildings there. Well, maybe the buildings could have been destroyed. Everything else, from the fall of a 1.5 meter warhead mock-up, a 1.5 ton mock-up divided into 36 elements, it kind of looks, well, not like the most rational way.
Also, another possible version could be that the guidance system actually failed, which is something that could have happened.
A strike on Kyiv, on the decision-making center, was planned, but they missed by 90 to 100 kilometers.
But it's not excluded that it was a conspiracy against the dictator Putin, and the strike was intentionally aimed elsewhere.
The people who planned this operation, they deliberately diverted the missiles from their true targets in order to, well, kind of shift the whole picture so that as a result, Russia couldn't cause significant damage to Ukraine. There was no strike on targets here either. It was such a massive, probably the strongest ballistic strike in the entire history of the city of Kyiv. But the result of it, yes, we have casualties, yes, we have victims, yes, a large number of various facilities have been destroyed. But with a ballistic strike like that, there should have been, well, more serious destruction of major targets.
This is already the 3rd time the criminal Kremlin regime has used this weapon against Ukraine in less than a year.
The strike on Dnipro, There was information about damage to a boiler house, but actually the territory of Yuzhmash itself is 440 hectares, I think. Hitting such a large area is, well, more or less possible. With what level of accuracy is another question.
In January 2026, Russia launched an Oreshnik at Lviv.
Somewhere closer to the center to deliver some serious blows to show the Europeans, look what will happen to you when we hit you with Oreshnik. But it seems to me that it also failed to reach its target.
This is a Russian tool of terror. It's unlikely that a missile whose primary purpose is to deliver a nuclear warhead would have a high level of accuracy. The Kremlin mothballed the production of Yars, or as Putin likes to call it, Oreshnik, back in 2018.
The first launches took place in 2012.
Experts believe that after the launch against Ukraine, the Russians might have at most one missile left.
It seems there was one unsuccessful missile launch. So most likely the Russians now have, in the best case scenario for them, 1 or 2 missiles left. And in the most probable scenario, they have run out of these missiles. So I don't really believe that the Russians resumed after 6 years. In 24, they supposedly resumed production, or were going to, that after 6 years, it's realistic to resume production of such missiles. At the Votkinsk machine building plant, which we also struck.
Moreover, it has not yet been proven that it was specifically Oreshnik brought to Belarus and not another missile.
What did they bring? From the pictures, they didn't bring Oreshnik. They brought some other tube that looks nothing like Oreshnik. They just slapped together some piece of plywood, some kind of outline, but Oreshnik is a significantly larger missile, 20 meters, and that one turned out to be about 12 meters.
Russian propaganda was shouting loudly that Russia could increase production, although there is no official data on this. Just as there are no specialists in Russia who could fix the errors.
The concept and approach of the Russians is not gradual improvement, but global leaps. And for global technological, scientific, and innovative leaps, Russia is no longer capable. Not at all. They have no innovative development. All of their so-called innovations are really just the continued use and adaptation of earlier Soviet technological developments.
Another missile that Putin boasts about is the Sarmat. It became one of the loudest
failures of the Kremlin's nuclear deterrence program.
The Sarmat had only one more or less decent successful launch, and everything else was a failure. One time it even blew apart that silo, and there's a crater about 200 meters wide. I can't even imagine something like that.
Well, you've probably seen these shots.
Attention crew, order received. Order received. Prepare for joint actions. Ready for joint actions.
But no one has been able to confirm the authenticity of the data that was reported to the bunker dictator. The use of Oreshnik, Sarmat or other weapons is nothing more than a means of pressure. Well, in fact, these missiles haven't received the proper attention and investment. No wonder. Observers often ironically call Oreshnik Putin's Wunderwaffe.
The methodical destruction of logistics in all directions of the occupied territories is gaining momentum. Against the backdrop of Putin's threats to regularly strike Kyiv, this is what the highway near the front line looks like now from the enemy's side. Well, sort of near the line. In these shots, a Russian convoy destroyed by Ukrainian drones is 100 kilometers from the front line. The logistics of the Russian Federation's armed forces are experiencing catastrophic problems. At the same time, the armed forces of Ukraine are working to soon scale this picture for the occupiers, even 200 kilometers from the front line. So it's clear what all this hysteria with the strikes on Kyiv is about. The armed forces of Ukraine's revenge for the hellish shelling of Ukraine, specifically Kyiv, Belgorod, and the Belgorod region, were under missile attack. According to the region's operational headquarters, damage was caused to energy infrastructure facilities. Let's look at the details.
Revenge for Kyiv, Russia get ready, in the swamps, an explosive morning.
There's the launch from over there. Everything's flying that way.
Energy and the railway are in the crosshairs. Even a concentration of a large amount of air defense doesn't save them. Russian strategic facilities. Ukrainian long-range strikes have become more destructive and regular.
If we're talking about our enemy, they have a systematic approach to terrorizing Ukraine and the genocide of Ukrainians. If we're talking about the work of the defense forces of Ukraine, it's a systematic effort to destroy the enemy's military, industrial, manufacturing, and industrial potential and their logistics, command staff, personnel, and so on. That is the potential to continue the war against Ukraine.
Ukrainian drone attacks have paralyzed or significantly limited the operation of a large number of major oil refineries in central and southern Russia. Since the beginning of May 2024 alone, about 11 oil refineries have been hit. Individual attacks in May reached record distances of over 1,500 kilometers from the front line, where several Russian aircraft were destroyed and damaged.
Ukraine, in turn, has achieved significant results, undermining the oil refining industries like never before. Earlier, throughout the entire period of strikes on Russian oil refineries, we can say that approximately 50% of the oil refining industry in the European part of the Russian Federation has lost its potential. In addition to this, Ukraine is carrying out strikes in the medium and deep rear zones of the Russian Federation, targeting military-industrial complex enterprises, airfields, military facilities, and other plants. Again, Kremny L, the Votkinsk plant. Precision strikes at the middle strike level are being carried out on the locations of Russian officers, of certain elite units.
Furthermore, Ukraine's unmanned systems forces have begun to systematically take out air defense systems. This creates air corridors for long-range drones to penetrate into the central regions of Russia.
The Russian Federation focuses exclusively on the murder and destruction of the civilian component of our country, that is, on the genocide of the civilian population. This applies to the energy infrastructure. This also applies to civilian logistics hubs, and it's simply the terrorizing of the civilian population, the killing of ordinary Ukrainians in the deep rear by shelling and strikes on residential complexes and buildings. That is the difference. We do everything for the sake of victory and accordingly undermine the potential of the Russian occupying forces.
Thanks to the rapid development of Ukrainian technology and the expansion of the geography of attacks, the entire European part of the Russian Federation is under constant fire threat.
We started in 2022 with the ability to strike deep into the territory of the Russian Federation or temporarily occupied territories up to 50 kilometers at exactly those distances. Today, our drones fly more than 2,000 kilometers and missiles can fly up to 3,000 kilometers deep into the territory of the Russian Federation. I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of 2026, we see another record for flight range and strikes, and in 2027, it will again be over 3,000 kilometers with attack drones alone.
In 4 years, Kiev has increased weapons production 35 times, switching to high-tech models. Some of the key developments include cruise missiles, Flamingo, the Hrim-2 system, anti-ship Neptune missiles, and drones.
We quite quickly, in extremely tight deadlines, actually implemented a number of projects related not only to the further modernization of already existing missile types and missile armaments, for example, the R-360 Neptune missiles, which have been modernized throughout all these years. And today we have the Neptune D missile with an increased range of up to 1,000 kilometers. But new models were also created, among which the most famous are, of course, Firepoint 5 and Flamingo.
The Ukrainian military-industrial complex has made a significant technological leap forward, transforming from an outdated Soviet base into one of the most innovative defense sectors in the world. While the Kremlin is forced to beg for shells from North Korea and drones from Iran, Ukraine is scaling up its own missile retaliation program.
In Ukraine, projects related to missile weaponry are developing at a fairly rapid pace. First of all, it's worth noting that in any other country, missile weaponry and the traditional process of creating missile weaponry in general are actually quite long-term projects. These are long-term endeavors. They aren't completed in months or even over several years. Therefore, in Ukraine, at truly extremely accelerated, forced, I would say, tempos, both the ongoing creation and development of subsonic cruise missiles is progressing, and we are also steadily moving closer to having our own reliably produced ballistic missiles.
The war has become a powerful catalyst for the development of the Ukrainian military-industrial complex. Thanks to private companies, Ukraine will be able to create defense innovations and effectively deploy them on the battlefield.
The Ukrainian General Staff confirmed that as a result of Ukrainian strikes, the oil refinery in Syzran in the Samara region has ceased operations. Well, the Tver region is joining the Russian flash mob, wait half a day in line for 20 liters of gas. There at Rosneft gas stations, 95 and 92 octane gasoline have run out. The region took over the baton from temporarily occupied Crimea, where the fuel situation is a total disaster. We'll talk more about the rapidly approaching fuel crisis in the gas station country. And don't forget to like this episode and subscribe to the Ukraine Today YouTube channel. Refueling a car in temporarily occupied Crimea has turned into a real quest on which you can spend a lot of time and money.
There is no 95 in power at all. As for 92, it is actually 75, not 95.
On the annexed peninsula, fuel supply disruptions are being reported at many gas stations. There is no gasoline or diesel fuel. Queues of cars are being observed. The Russian authorities in Sevastopol have introduced restrictions on the sale of fuel, explaining the situation by logistical difficulties.
Currently, there are certain logistical difficulties, the reasons for which are well known. The government of Sevastopol and the leadership of the Republic of Crimea are doing everything possible to normalize the situation as soon as possible. To avoid a rush, as in the past, we are introducing a measure that has already proven its effectiveness. Fuel sales at TES network gas stations will be limited to 20 liters per car or 1 canister until the situation stabilizes.
The problem with gasoline is not only on the annexed peninsula. The same situation is occurring on all temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. Moreover, shortages of 95 and 92 octane gasoline have begun in many regions of the Russian Federation.
People are stocking up in the Tver region. There's no gas, only 100 octane and diesel. Five minutes ago, there was only 92. The pumps are closing.
In the Tver region, there's a huge gas shortage. It's almost gone, and where it is available, the price has soared. The gasoline crisis is slowly but surely engulfing central Russia.
Russia's gasoline consumption is 100,000 tons. Currently in Russia, by various estimates, between 35 and 45,000 tons of gas are produced daily. We're talking about AI 92 and 95, primarily about 95 octane gasoline. This hasn't happened, mind you, since the autumn of 2025. 8 out of the 10 largest gasoline producers are at a standstill. I'll repeat, 8 out of the 10 largest refineries producing gasoline are currently offline.
Last night, the armed forces of Ukraine launched another drone strike on a refinery. This time, a plant in Yaroslavl was hit. A few days before this strike, drones attacked the Lukoil Nizhny Novgorod Nefteorgsyntes refinery. In the city of Kstovo, in the Nizhny Novgorod region of the Russian Federation, Ukrainian UAVs attacked this plant twice in 3 days. Refineries that produce over 30% of Russia's gasoline and about 20% of its diesel fuel were hit by the AFU.
These aren't just some strikes for PR effect or for some kind of oil windfall. This is a strategic operation on the scale of the Battle of Kursk. That's what we're seeing now, though few people realize it. Right now, the government's main task is to prevent a gasoline panic in Moscow and St. Petersburg, because these are the two most important consumers of gasoline. And what's happening now due to the loss of production capacity in Russia's central regions is already an unsolvable problem in principle.
Besides the fuel shortage inside Russia, Ukrainian drones continue to limit Russia's income from oil refining and energy.
Ukrainian strikes continue to limit the revenues of the Russian oil refining industry and energy resources.